Adam Schiff walked into the Senate hearing expecting to play the prosecutor, but Senator John Neely Kennedy was waiting with 4 manila folders ready to dismantle an 8-year narrative on live television. 14 seconds of absolute silence stretched across the room. The Senate lapel pin on Adam Schiff's $3,000 suit jacket had tilted 4 degrees off its vertical axis. He was no longer attempting to adjust it. His right hand gripped the small piece of metal with the quiet desperation of a drowning man clinging to wreckage, knowing that letting go would be far worse. Directly across the aisle, the 73-year-old country lawyer from Madisonville, Louisiana, peered at him coldly over the rim of his reading glasses. "Senator, I am going to ask you one final time, and then I will stop asking, because I believe the 4 million Americans watching this broadcast have already deduced the answer." The manila folder resting on the bench in front of John Neely Kennedy was turned open to the 7th page. That document was a Fannie Mae refinance affidavit explicitly dated the 19th of April, 2011. The signature belonging to Adam Schiff sat undeniably at the bottom of the page. Schiff offered no response. Rewind 53 minutes to the moment Adam Schiff made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed he was the undisputed authority in the room, treating the proceeding as his own personal courtroom rather than a reckoning. 3 minutes into his opening remarks, his navy suit lapel pin was perfectly aligned, and his branded sparkling water sat undisturbed. He had confidently reviewed the witness list during his flight from Los Angeles the previous night, finding absolutely no names that caused him concern. "I would gently remind my colleague that the work of this committee is not bait shop business," Schiff declared. "We are handling matters of conduits and magnitude, and I ask the senator from Louisiana, with all due respect, to remember that he is sitting in the United States Senate." Smiles rippled across the Democratic side of the dais. A staffer situated in the second row offered a subtle thumbs up. What Schiff fundamentally failed to realize was that Kennedy had spent his previous evening inside a third-floor office of the Russell Senate Office Building alongside 2 staffers from the Senate Banking Committee. Kennedy had analyzed printed reports from the Federal Housing Finance Agency and compiled a specific manila folder. They finalized the documents at 1,117 at night. Kennedy took the folder home, reviewed it, made a single 6-minute phone call, and went to sleep. That exact folder now rested on the lower bench. Schiff pressed his perceived advantage, and while I respect the senator's law degree from a fine state institution, I must remind him that not everyone here learned constitutional law from textbooks printed prior to the Voting Rights Act. Leaning back, Schiff appeared satisfied. In the wings, his communications director offered a slow, approving nod, reminiscent of a film director, concluding a successful take. Across the aisle, Senator Kennedy did not react to the provocation. Methodically, he removed his reading glasses, retrieved a crisp white handkerchief from his jacket pocket, and wiped the right lens, followed by the left. He folded the cloth into a neat square, returned it to his pocket, and placed the glasses back on his face. He opened his unbranded, standard-issue plastic water bottle, took a measured sip, and secured the cap. He placed the bottle exactly 2 inches to the left of its original position. Only then did he pick up the manila folder and turn to page 4, holding it flat with his left hand. 12 seconds ticked by in silence before he finally adjusted his microphone. "Senator Schiff, thank you kindly for the welcome." His Louisiana drawl was thick and authentic. "It was not a theatrical performance, it was pure Madisonville. Where I come from, my father ran a small bait shop down by the Chafuncta River, selling mostly worms. He used to tell me something while I was growing up. He said, 'Son, when a man spends the first 3 minutes of a conversation explaining how foolish you are, he is usually about to do something remarkably foolish himself.' He let the words hang in the heavy air of the chamber. I always considered that to be highly sound advice. The smiles on the opposing side faltered, fading much slower this time. A senator seated 3 chairs down from Schiff let out a brief laugh before abruptly silencing himself. Kennedy kept his eyes locked on the documents. "Senator, I would like to ask you a series of questions regarding a specific property located in Potomac, Maryland." All amusement vanished from the room. Schiff's hand moved nervously toward his lapel pin for the very first time. Page 4 was a black and white photocopy, slightly skewed from the original scanning process. Printed at the top in the standard sans serif typography utilized by Fannie Mae for decades were the words, "Uniform Residential Loan Application Refinance." Kennedy lifted the document for the broadcast cameras. The C-SPAN producer ordered a tight zoom, and Schiff's signature instantly filled 12 million television screens nationwide. "That is your signature, is it not, Senator?" The polished veneer in Schiff's voice remained intact. The composure would entirely shatter by minute 18, but at minute 12, he was holding the line. "Senator Kennedy, that document is being grossly mischaracterized. The FHFA referral is part of a politically motivated— I did not ask you about the agency referral, Senator," Kennedy interrupted, his tone remaining deceptively polite and neighborly. "I asked you about the signature on the paper. Is it yours, or is it not?" Schiff shot a desperate glance toward his communications director in the wings. Sarah Lynn, a veteran strategist whose resume boasted a senior vice president title at a major beltway firm, was already looking down at her mobile device. She was frantically typing, refusing to make eye contact with her boss. It was the first undeniable indicator of impending collapse. "Senator, the document speaks for itself," Schiff replied. "In a standard legal proceeding, that response is a tactical evasion. On national television in front of 4 million viewers, it translates as a direct confession." A reporter seated in the second row, working for a publication that had fiercely defended Schiff for 6 consecutive years, jotted down a single observation in his notebook. He did not deny the signature. Kennedy did not need to press the issue further. "Yes, sir, it certainly does." He lowered the page and prepared his next piece of evidence. "It clearly states that on the 19th of April, 2011, you swore under federal penalty that a house in Maryland was your primary residence." He produced a second photocopy, this one bearing the official seal of Los Angeles County. This document utilizes the same standard font and the same declaratory legal language. It is a Los Angeles County Assessor's homeowner exemption form from the exact same year, 2011. The listed property is a condominium in Burbank, California. The application requires the individual to certify that the property is their primary residence within the state. "You signed this document as well, Senator." A calculated pause followed. "The 28th of April, 2011. A second pause. "Exactly 9 days after signing the Maryland certification, the press gallery went dead silent. Multiple reporters simultaneously noted the 9-day discrepancy in their margins. Off camera, Sarah Lynn ceased her typing. She lowered her phone to her side, recognizing that whatever statement she was drafting was no longer relevant to the crisis unfolding in the room. "In my hometown, telling 2 different banks the identical story on 2 different days is just being polite," Kennedy stated, his pacing slowly accelerating. "Telling 2 banks completely contradictory stories within the exact same month is another matter entirely." A third, heavy pause. "It is a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1014, making a false statement to a financial institution, a serious federal violation carrying severe federal penalties." A collective quiet murmur rippled through the journalists. It was the distinct sound of a press corps realizing the entire foundation of their reporting had just fractured. Kennedy did not pause to bask in the reaction. He dealt out 3 additional photocopies with absolute surgical precision. I possess 5 of these documents, Senator. 2009, 2011, 2012, and 2013, in addition to the original 2003 purchase agreement, the exact same property, the identical legal certification, the exact same signature, 5 separate Fannie Mae loans. Kennedy closed the folder smoothly. Fannie Mae's Internal Financial Compliance Division, using their official terminology, not mine, on letterhead dated May 2025, cited a sustained pattern of possible occupancy misrepresentation. That is the federal mortgage insurer actively investigating your conduct. The director of the FHFA sent a formal legal referral to the Attorney General, citing severe financial misreporting, mail misrepresentation, bank misrepresentation, and false statements. That is the federal statutes, Senator. It is not an editorial. Schiff's mind raced through his previously calculated defense. He knew the statute of limitations for Section 1014 was exactly 10 years. The final document was signed in 2013, meaning the legal exposure theoretically expired in 2023. He had banked his entire survival on this mathematical technicality, but he had failed to account for the devastating impact of having the referral read aloud on live television by a methodical interrogator. The technicality offered zero protection in the court of public opinion. While you certified Maryland as your primary residence to secure lower interest rates across 5 separate refinancings, you simultaneously claimed a California tax exemption for your Burbank property, Kennedy noted, locking eyes with Schiff across the room. Are you aware of the exact value of that California exemption? Roughly $7,000 annually off your property taxes for a decade? The financial calculation hung heavily in the sterile air of the hearing room. That equates to $70,000 of California taxpayer money pocketed while providing contradictory information to financial institutions in Maryland. In the wings, Schiff's communications director inadvertently dropped her phone. The device clattered loudly against the marble floor of the hallway. She made absolutely no attempt to retrieve it. Senator, I want to be entirely fair regarding this matter, Kennedy continued, his tone shifting to a clinical, almost regretful register. There are legitimate scenarios where a member of Congress maintains 2 year-round homes. The Federal Mortgage Code accommodates this reality through occupancy designation. You declare one property as primary, the other as secondary, and you pay the corresponding rates. The stability of the entire financial system relies on individuals providing truthful information on that specific form. Kennedy paused. You did not pick one. You selected both for a decade across 5 separate loans, while simultaneously telling the state of California, under penalty of false declarations, that Burbank was your sole primary residence. The federal mortgage system does not allow a person to maintain 2 primary residences. It is logically equivalent to claiming 2 sets of dependents for the identical child with the IRS. The IRS penalizes that behavior. So does Fannie Mae. No one in the press section laughed. The room understood that Kennedy's analogies were not punchlines, they were surgical instruments utilized to dissect the defense. According to industry analysts, reviewing your specific loan terms, the financial benefit of this misclassification totals between $40,000 and $60,000 in interest savings, plus the $70,000 in tax exemptions. Conservatively, that is over $100,000 in unauthorized financial benefits across 10 years, extracted from 2 separate state systems legally entitled to the truth. Schiff finally responded, his polished demeanor visibly cracking. He grasped for a justification. Senator Kennedy, my addresses were listed as primary residences, because both are occupied throughout the entire year to legally distinguish them from vacation properties. With respect, Kennedy countered, raising a single index finger. That is a public relations statement, not a factual legal defense. The ally who had chuckled earlier was now intently studying the ceiling architecture, deliberately avoiding any association with the confrontation. The federal code does not define a primary residence as wherever you happen to sleep on a given month. It specifies a singular location. You are a Harvard-educated attorney. You know exactly what the term primary signifies in the English language. Primary means one. You cannot possess a primary and an additional primary. We have a specific terminology for that behavior in Louisiana, but I will refrain from broadcasting it on television. A brief, tense chuckle escaped the press row before a supportive producer muttered in sheer disbelief. An MSNBC reporter stared blankly ahead, completely paralyzed by the unfolding disaster. Therefore, either you committed mortgage misrepresentation, a serious federal violation, or you are claiming on live television that the Harvard lawyer who orchestrated a presidential impeachment does not comprehend the definition of the word primary. Which is it, Senator? Schiff offered absolutely no response. He stared intensely at the closed manila folder, the only object in the chamber not currently rendering judgment upon him. Kennedy pushed the manila folder aside and replaced it with a red one. I did not travel from Louisiana simply to discuss Maryland real estate. I came to discuss an event you claim to have witnessed, then denied, then confirmed, and then claimed total ignorance about. I have 3 more folders, Senator. The red folder bore a precise handwritten label, HPSCI 92619. Reporters immediately documented the date. On the 26th of September, 2019, while serving as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, you opened a televised public hearing. You stated for the official record, "I have the call right here," and proceeded to read your version of the conversation aloud. Do you recall what you claimed the president said? Schiff hesitated, taking 2 subtle beats to select a rehearsed contingency plan. Senator Kennedy, my opening statement was clearly characterized at the time as a parody. Senator Kennedy's voice sharpened instantly, capturing the attention of the press gallery. A reporter scribbled a quick note, indicating that the trap had been sprung. A visible flush crept up Schiff's neck. The robotic camera zoomed in tightly, capturing a single drop of perspiration rolling down his skin before vanishing into his collar, broadcasting the physical reaction directly to millions of viewers. It was characterized as a dramatic representation of the president's intent, not a verbatim quote. Schiff insisted. Kennedy lifted a page from the bench. I will read exactly what you stated on the record. You said, "I have a favor I want you to do for me." You continued, "I am going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. And finally, I want you to make up negative opposition research on my political opponent." The audio engineer boosted the microphone gain as the room fell into absolute silence. You read those fabricated quotes into the official congressional record on national television, acting as the chairman with top-secret intelligence clearance. The journalists stopped pretending to take notes, fully absorbed by the interrogation. The detail that always fascinated me, Kennedy noted calmly, is the timeline. Do you know when the actual declassified transcript was released by the White House? The 25th of September, 2019. Exactly 1 day prior to you reading your fabricated version into the record. You had the genuine transcript sitting directly on your desk, and you purposefully chose to read a fake one aloud. Down the dais, a Democratic senator focused entirely on his locked smartphone screen, desperately avoiding eye contact with the spectacle. On the 21st of June, 2023, the House of Representatives formally censured you by a vote of 213 to 209. Kennedy concluded. The resolution explicitly stated that you purposely deceived your committee, Congress, and the American people. That is not a subjective opinion. That is the permanent historical record. You are the 25th lawmaker in American history to face such discipline. You are in highly exclusive company. This was the moment Adam Schiff believed his fiery rhetoric had successfully secured the Senate hearing room, completely unaware that Senator John Neely Kennedy was patiently waiting for the applause to fade before delivering a fatal documented blow. Adam Schiff stood up, pushing his chair back 2 inches before planting both hands firmly on the table. The Harvard Law graduate who finished cum laude in 1985, the former federal clerk, the assistant United States attorney who once secured an intelligence breach ruling against an FBI agent, that man suddenly awoke. The California senator and lead impeachment manager who once stood on the floor of the United States Senate and declared his actions a turning point in American history finally found his footing. His voice escalated through the chamber. Senator Kennedy. That censure was a purely political act. His index finger jabbed aggressively into the wooden table, causing the branded sparkling water bottle to vibrate. It was driven entirely by Donald Trump's partisan allies in the House. It carried absolutely no legal weight, and it imposed no financial penalty. 20 Republicans initially voted to table the motion before Congresswoman Luna stripped out the $16 million fine just to secure her votes. That is not a legal verdict, Senator. That is political theater. The Progressive Press Gallery, which had remained uncomfortably silent for 19 minutes, offered scattered applause. A producer positioned in the back of the room, representing a network that had paid for the privilege of broadcasting Schiff-friendly coverage for 6 consecutive years, rose to his feet and applauded with both hands raised above his head. A distinct voice muttered an audible agreement. A young woman wearing a Schiff campaign hat, who had been anxiously holding her breath ever since the Maryland mortgage affidavit was revealed, finally exhaled and joined the clapping. And while we are discussing the concept of accountability, Senator, let us review what Donald Trump actually did during that infamous phone call. Schiff pressed on, seizing the momentum. He pressured a foreign leader to manufacture opposition research on a political opponent. He deliberately withheld military assistance from a nation actively engaged in a war with Russia. He betrayed our international allies, he betrayed our intelligence community, and he betrayed the Constitution itself. I stand resolutely by every single word of that opening statement, Senator, because the underlying substance was entirely accurate, even if the literary device utilized was a parody. His voice echoed powerfully toward the crystal chandeliers. In the front row, an MSNBC reporter silently mouthed the words, "That is the soundbite. And if you, sir, are now utilizing a United States Senate hearing to relitigate the impeachment of a man who has been impeached twice, indicted 4 times, and found liable on 34 severe legal counts, then perhaps the bookkeeping in this room is exactly where it belongs." The progressive wing stood in unison for 15 full seconds. The hearing room belonged entirely to Adam Schiff. Cable news producers stationed in broadcasting trucks parked outside the Hart Building frantically began clipping the video feed. The young Schiff staffer in the back row, possessing a master's degree in political communications from Georgetown University, and having studied this precise rhetorical maneuver in graduate seminars, recorded the moment vertically on her smartphone for social media. 2 Democratic senators on the dais nodded their approval. One of them rhythmically muttered Schiff's first name under his breath, resembling a boxing coach watching his fighter decisively win the 8th round on the scorecards. Directly across the room, seated at the lower bench, John Kennedy did not interrupt the spectacle. He made no defensive gestures. He remained entirely motionless. He did not even bother to close the red folder resting before him. He sat with his hands folded quietly over the manila document, embodying the relaxed posture of a seasoned country lawyer who has attended enough trials to understand that an overconfident witness, when given enough rope, will inevitably rest the prosecution's case for them. The applause crested, reached its peak, and slowly began to fall. Once the ambient noise had dropped far enough for the C-SPAN audio engineer to reset the gain controls back to their baseline setting, Kennedy finally spoke. The heavy Louisiana drawl was gone. It did not disappear completely, rather, it was carefully set aside, much like a man hanging his hat on a hook by the door, fully aware he will need to retrieve it in a few minutes. The voice that resonated through the microphone now was a voice nobody in that hearing room had encountered all morning. It was not the voice expected by Schiff, nor his communications director, nor the politicians on the dais. It certainly surprised the Atlantic reporter in the third row, who had covered Kennedy for a profile assignment 3 years prior, and had confidently concluded in print that the Southern drawl was almost certainly a theatrical performance. The voice that emerged now was the authentic voice of John Neely Kennedy, Juris Doctor, from the University of Virginia School of Law. Magna cum laude. Class of 1977. Holder of a postgraduate diploma in Law and Government from Magdalen College at Oxford University, the man who served as the Louisiana State Treasurer from the year 2000 until 2017. The tone was chillingly precise, perfectly calibrated for a federal appellate courtroom. The Southern accent had not vanished, it had simply been placed on the hook. Senator Schiff, deep within Schiff's mind, bypassing the rapidly spinning Rolodex of prepared rebuttals and rehearsed sound bites, a sudden cold calculation materialized, one he had failed to run during his flight from Los Angeles inside his Lincoln Town car or while waiting in the green room. The calculation was stark and terrifying. Kennedy had prepared for this exact moment. He had prepared for this contingency the night before. The Oxford-educated voice continued its clinical dissection. Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution grants each respective chamber of Congress the absolute authority to punish its members for disorderly behavior. The formal censure of a sitting member serves as one of 3 explicitly defined disciplinary mechanisms available to the chamber, alongside reprimand and expulsion. It is categorically not theater, it is constitutional discipline. The final vote was 213 to 209. That resolution remains permanently etched into the official record of the United States House of Representatives. The document deliberately utilizes the word purposely deceived. Kennedy paused for a single heavy beat. That is not a literary device, Senator. That is a formal congressional finding. Slowly, the familiar Southern drawl returned, slipping back into place like that hat being taken off the hook. The Oxford litigator quietly exited the room, and the Madisonville country lawyer walked back in to finish the job. Now, you can label it political, you can label it theater, you can call it whatever you prefer in your own mind, but what you absolutely cannot do, Senator, is read a fabricated, fake transcript of a presidential telephone call into the congressional record on national television, receive a formal censure for that deception by the United States House, and then sit here 4 years later, attempting to tell a country lawyer from Louisiana that the censure simply does not count. Kennedy's eyes locked directly onto Schiff's. It absolutely counts, Senator. It counted back then, it counts right now, and it will undeniably count when the historians sit down to write exactly what kind of committee chairman you truly were. The lingering applause was completely extinguished. Sometime during the preceding 40 seconds, the progressive section had quietly seated themselves. None of them could explicitly remember making the decision to sit down. The young staffer with the Georgetown master's degree abruptly stopped recording her video. The network producer in the back of the room turned to a colleague, whispering nervously to ask whether anyone had bothered to read the recently declassified testimony of Michael Atkinson. Adam Schiff had commanded the room for exactly 15 seconds. He had then brutally lost the subsequent 90. The red folder snapped shut, It made the same small, definitive wooden sound against the desk as the manila one had moments before. 2 folders stacked, 2 remained. A navy blue folder materialized on the bench. It was noticeably thicker than the other 2 documents. Any veteran reporter in the press section, who had spent more than a year covering Schiff, understood the devastating implications of that thickness immediately. The Atlantic journalist in the 3rd row, who had been an early vocal defender of the 2019 impeachment, quietly placed his pen down onto his open notebook. He would not pick it back up for the next 11 minutes. "Senator, do you recall Mr. Michael Atkinson?" Schiff had seated himself during the Oxford Voice interlude. His right hand had instinctively returned to his lapel pin, gripping it the way a man's hand reaches for a handrail in a darkened hallway he is no longer entirely sure of navigating. The pin appeared centered on his lapel, but as the C-SPAN camera feed had quietly documented over the past 4 minutes, it was no longer perfectly aligned. It had slipped exactly 2 degrees off its vertical axis. Senator Kennedy, the Inspector General, who was incidentally an Obama administration appointee. "Yes, sir. I remember perfectly. I simply want to ensure the folks watching at home remember it as well, because this narrative becomes far more illuminating when you understand exactly whose appointee Mr. Atkinson was." The drawl deepened as he opened the thick navy folder. Mr. Atkinson received a formal whistleblower complaint on the 12th of August 2019. This complaint centered entirely on a telephone conversation between President Trump and the President of Ukraine. The actual call occurred on July 25th. The complaint was formally filed 18 days later. The complainant in question was a CIA analyst whose identity has populated the public record for 5 years now. Kennedy's gaze pierced Schiff once more. "Senator, prior to that whistleblower filing his formal complaint with Mr. Atkinson, before he physically filled out the official government form signed under penalty of false declarations, did he or did he not establish prior contact with members of your committee staff?" Senator Kennedy: "The whistleblower's identity remains shielded by federal statute, and I did not ask for his identity, Senator." The tone was exceptionally patient, mirroring a physician dealing with a stubbornly evasive patient who keeps trying to flee the examining room. "I specifically asked whether he communicated with your staff before initiating the complaint." Schiff glanced desperately toward his communications director in the wings. Sarah Lynn, the woman who had previously dropped her device, was staring at her phone screen once again. The phone was face up this time. She was scrolling frantically. She was not scrolling for entertainment, she was scrolling for a defensive talking point that simply was not coming. "Senator Kennedy, my committee personnel received a routine inquiry from an individual expressing concerns regarding a potential matter for the Inspector General. We strictly adhered to all proper protocols." "Routine, Senator." A calculated pause descended over the room, perfectly timed for maximum tension. Was it standard routine that a mere 2 weeks before that formal complaint materialized, specifically the exact day following the Trump-Zelensky phone call, your committee hired a gentleman named Sean Misko? The chamber, which had already grown quiet, shifted into a suffocating absolute silence. In the wings, Sarah Lynn stopped her frantic scrolling. She placed her phone face down on the wooden railing. She would not pick it back up for the remainder of the hearing. Mr. Misko, according to verified public records reported by the Washington Examiner, served as a former National Security Council aide. He operated at the NSC during the Obama administration. He worked there directly alongside the precise individual who subsequently filed the whistleblower complaint. They were professional colleagues. Several individuals who worked alongside them stated they were exceptionally close. One former White House official explicitly utilized the term bro-like to describe their relationship. A tired, unamused smile crossed Kennedy's face. It was neither cruel nor kind, it was simply exhausted by the deception. You officially hired Mr. Misko on the 26th of July 2019. The presidential phone call occurred on July 25th. That represents a single-day gap, Senator. One day, and the individual you hired on day 2 just happened to be the former roommate of the man who authored the complaint that ultimately triggered the impeachment of the President of the United States. The drawl found Schiff's eyes one more time. That is quite a spectacular coincidence, is it not, Senator? Senator Kennedy, Mr. Misko is a highly qualified national security professional, possessing extensive. He is also the identical individual who, according to 2 former White House officials speaking openly on the record to Real Clear Investigations, was overheard inside the West Wing in February 2017, exactly 2 weeks after President Trump took the oath of office, discussing specific strategies to unseat the executive. 2 weeks into the administration, that specific story has resided in the public domain for years. Senator, a heavy, rhythmic beat. Have you ever bothered to read it? A tighter, more oppressive pause followed. That report remains unverified. Schiff deflected. Real Clear Investigations is the exact same media outlet that broke the Hunter Biden laptop authentication. They are not a supermarket tabloid, Senator. We have 2 White House officials speaking on the public record regarding a man you employed exactly 1 day after the phone call he eventually flagged for investigation. The MSNBC reporter seated in the front row completely lost her stoic, professional composure. Her face was now twisting into a visible grimace. 3 rows behind her, a podcast producer who had spent 4 straight years christening Adam Schiff as the undisputed conscience of the Constitution, whispered frantically to a colleague that an emergency phone call to their network host was now unavoidable. That afternoon. Now, here is the specific part of the story that consistently makes me scratch my head. Senator Kennedy smoothly extracted a 4th photocopied document. On September 17, 2019, you appeared on national television specifically. You went on MSNBC. The television host directly asked if your intelligence committee had established any contact whatsoever with the whistleblower. You stated, and this footage is readily available on tape for anyone to pull up, quote, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to." A deliberate pause. That interview occurred on a Tuesday. A significantly longer pause. Exactly 2 weeks later, on October 2nd, the New York Times reported, not Fox News. Senator, the New York Times reported that the whistleblower had, in verifiable fact, communicated with your staff before ever filing the complaint. Your office subsequently released a public statement admitting to that prior contact. Therefore, either you possessed absolutely zero knowledge regarding what your own committee staff was doing, Senator, or you stared directly into a national television camera and willfully lied to the American public. He offered a small southern shrug, tinged with a devastating sense of regret. Please pick one. Schiff's grip on his lapel pin tightened noticeably. The golden pin had now slipped from 2 degrees off-center to a full 4 degrees. While the imperfection was undetectable to the naked eye from the elevated dais, it was glaringly obvious on the direct C-SPAN broadcast feed. The technical producer sitting inside the external media truck simply said the word "pin" into his headset microphone, and the camera briefly switched to a tight close-up of the crooked emblem. The metal caught the studio lighting in a harsh way. It had not caught the light during minute 4 of the hearing. Senator Kennedy, the interactions between my staff and the complainant were purely procedural and entirely consistent with Mr. Atkinson. Testified before your own committee on the 4th of October 2019. Senator Kennedy's voice dropped into a lower, heavier register. While under oath, he testified that the whistleblower deliberately failed to disclose on the official complaint form that he had already contacted members of your staff. That specific federal form explicitly demands the disclosure of, quote, other actions you have taken on your disclosure, signed under penalty of false declarations. Mr. Atkinson stated, and I am reading directly from your own committee's official transcript, had we known of the prior contact, it would have been an additional matter for our review. He found Schiff's gaze again, holding it captive. That is not Devin Nunes talking to you, Senator. That is not Donald Trump making an accusation. That is a Barack Obama appointee directly informing your committee that the factual timeline simply did not add up. Another drawn-out Southern pause. And this brings me to the fundamental issue I keep coming back to, Senator. The voice dropped yet another half-step in volume. The C-SPAN audio engineer instinctively boosted the microphone gain for the fourth consecutive time that morning. The whistleblower complaint that initiated the historical impeachment of a sitting United States president. The singular document that launched a full Senate trial, dominated 3 uninterrupted months of global news coverage, and completely consumed the entire bandwidth of American politics in the fall of 2019. That entire complaint was constructed completely on hearsay. Mr. Atkinson confirmed this reality under oath. The whistleblower was not participating in the phone call. He did not hear the conversation take place. He had reviewed a summarized readout. He conversed with other individuals who had also reviewed a readout. He subsequently communicated with your committee staff, and then he submitted a formal complaint, deliberately concealing the fact that he had talked to your staff. A heavy, punishing beat. 16 of the 18 impeachment witnesses summoned by your committee, Senator, provided hearsay testimony. 16 out of 18. The remaining 2 individuals who were not relying on hearsay could not successfully establish the central allegation. Once the actual transcript of the actual phone call was declassified, it simply did not reflect what the whistleblower claimed it contained. The President of the United States declassified the document himself. Anyone could read it, and anyone who actually took the time to read it realized that the dialogue you recited aloud on September 26th did not exist in the actual conversation. Behind Schiff's rapid mental catalog of prepared defenses, none of which applied to the current methodical onslaught, a secondary realization firmly took hold. His initial mental calculation over Nebraska had involved statutes of limitations regarding mortgage misrepresentation. This new realization was brutally, overwhelmingly simple. Kennedy possessed everything. Every public statement, every transcript, every television hit Schiff had ever made was neatly cataloged in those colored folders. Schiff's mouth opened, closed, and opened once again. Senator, the Inspector General's testimony has been severely mischaracterized. By whom, Senator? The drawl was deceptively light, conversational, resembling the tone a man uses when casually asking his neighbor if he needs help carrying groceries. 2 reporters seated in the second row simultaneously jotted down the grammatical correction "whom" in their notebooks. Was it mischaracterized by the New York Times, by Mr. Atkinson, by the Washington Examiner, by 2 former White House officials, or perhaps by me? A small, intensely tired smile surfaced on Kennedy's face. Because someone in this scenario is certainly mischaracterizing the facts, and I assure you, it is not the Inspector General. A deep silence followed. Then the Southern drawl executed a maneuver it had avoided all morning. It dropped a full vocal register. The folksy charm was still present, the Madisonville roots were still audible, but the professional courtesy, the polite senator, with respect facade, completely evaporated. The voice that arrived now belonged to a man who had extended professional deference for 43 minutes and decided, somewhere between Sean Misko's hiring date and the September 17th MSNBC tape, that he was utterly finished offering it. Senator, Allow me to articulate exactly what I believe you desperately wish I would leave unsaid. I think you lied. I think you lied to a national television audience on the 17th of September 2019. I think you lied when you recited a fake, fabricated transcript into the Congressional record on September 26th. I think you lied for 4 consecutive years to any journalist willing to place a microphone in front of your face, and I firmly believe you knew you were lying the entire time. Now, you are welcome to object to my framing of the situation. You can dismiss it as partisan theater. You can instruct your communications director to publish a press release after this hearing labeling me a right-wing distraction. However, the American citizens watching this broadcast on their televisions at home, the working taxpayers who funded the $32 million investigation spawned from your fabrications, are fundamentally entitled to hear someone, just one time on a live broadcast, say the actual word out loud. A heavy, unyielding beat hung in the air. You lied, Senator, to the public for years. The hearing room froze. Sarah Lynn, standing in the wings, clamped her hand tightly over her mouth. The MSNBC reporter in the front row was staring intently at the tips of her shoes. 2 senators seated on the elevated dais had audibly ceased breathing. The audio engineer, safely parked outside in the broadcasting truck, simply leaned back in his leather chair and whispered the Lord's name into his morning coffee mug. Schiff remained entirely mute. The press gallery did not laugh. They had been chuckling comfortably 40 minutes prior. The seasoned journalist who had sat in this exact same hearing room 6 years earlier during the Trump impeachment proceedings had spent that entire historical hearing feverishly taking notes, documenting every word, the way an apostle records gospel. Today, she was not taking notes at all. Her hands rested limply in her lap, her face was pointed directly at the carpeted floor, about 3 feet in front of her shoes. Something fundamental had fractured within the room, and nobody had warned the press. Or perhaps, and this was the terrifying reality, the Atlantic reporter in the 3rd row was beginning to understand in real time, a sensation he would later describe to a colleague over drinks as discovering the parish priest had been the local thief. All along the press had been warned. The press had been explicitly told the truth for 4 consecutive years. A significant portion of them had simply, willingly chosen not to listen. The navy blue folder closed securely. 3 distinct folders now rested in a neat stack on the lower bench. Only one remained. A black folder was brought forward. It did not open immediately. For the first time in 51 minutes, the lower bench was perfectly still. Kennedy did not touch the cover. He did not extract a single document or photograph. He simply stared at the black folder, then shifted his gaze to Schiff, before glancing very briefly toward the rear of the hearing chamber. The broadcast cameras had remained locked tightly on the politicians seated at the dais all morning. They had completely overlooked the 3rd row from the back, positioned on the left side of the room, where 3 distinct men had been sitting quietly since 8:45 a.m. The Atlantic reporter sitting in the 2nd row had walked directly past those 3 men on his way inside without registering their presence. 2 of them had been casually holding coffee cups. One of them had been reading a physical copy of the Wall Street Journal. None of them wore official press credentials. None of them wore identifying witness pins. Only the Republican committee chairman from Iowa had been informed of their presence at dawn. The rest of the room remained entirely oblivious to the trap. Senator Kennedy began, his voice leveling into a steady, uncompromising cadence, stripping away both the Southern folksy charm and the Oxford legal polish, leaving only the stark, undeniable reality of a man who has reached the phase of the trial where performance is no longer required. On the 20th of March 2017, you served as the ranking minority member of the House Intelligence Committee. You delivered a highly anticipated opening statement during a public hearing. That hearing was nationally televised. Tens of millions of Americans viewed that broadcast. And during your opening statement, Senator, you deliberately read aloud into the official congressional record of the United States multiple highly specific allegations sourced directly from a document known as the Steele dossier. Adam Schiff assumed the worst of the interrogation was behind him, but Senator John Kennedy was just unsealing the black folder, the final exhibit that would bring the casualties of a political narrative face to face with their architect. The black folder opened. Resting on top was a single 8x10 photograph, magnifying a heavily redacted page from an aging dossier. "You remember reading those claims, Senator?" Kennedy asked. Schiff attempted to deflect. Senator Kennedy, the dossier, was a topic of public discussion at the time, and it was Kennedy severed the excuse. "Senator, it was a topic, but there is a fundamental difference between a conversational topic and actual evidence. You presented those specific claims as evidence. You stated on ABC News in March 2017, quote, 'There is more than circumstantial evidence of collusion.'" Kennedy produced a second image, a television screenshot capturing Schiff mid-sentence with his mouth slightly open. "You repeated this claim on CNN. You repeated it on MSNBC. You stated it at the Aspen Institute and on Meet the Press. You utilized the exact phrase 'more than circumstantial' for 2.5 years. The Southern drawl paused. "Senator, did you ever produce that evidence, son?" The chamber descended into a profound silence. The press gallery remained a row of frozen heads. The dais was motionless. Outside the Hart Building, cable news producers ceased issuing directives to their camera operators. The C-SPAN audio engineer leaned over his mixing console, listening intently, possessing the posture of a man bearing witness to a monumental confession. "Did you ever, even one time, in 2.5 years of television appearances, produce this more than circumstantial evidence?" Kennedy pressed. Schiff reached for a familiar shield. "Senator Kennedy, the Mueller investigation." Kennedy dismantled it instantly. "The Mueller investigation found zero conspiracy, Senator. The C-SPAN audio gain was already pushed to its maximum limit. It cost the American taxpayer $32 million across 2.5 years of news cycles." The written conclusion from Special Counsel Robert Mueller, a Republican and former FBI director appointed by a Republican president, explicitly stated that the investigation, quote, "did not establish coordination or conspiracy." A heavy beat passed. Furthermore, Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz, a nonpartisan figure, issued a report in December 2019. He identified 17 significant errors and omissions within the FISA applications utilized to surveil Carter Page. Those were the exact applications relying upon the Steele dossier. Horowitz testified on the record that the FBI had already terminated Christopher Steele as a confidential source for lying prior to the FISA renewals, and yet nobody informed the FISA court. Kennedy maintained direct eye contact with Schiff. Special Counsel John Durham issued his final report in May 2023. He concluded the FBI possessed no proper legal basis for launching the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. None. Durham explicitly labeled the dossier unverified and unreliable. The primary subsource, a fellow named Igor Danchenko, was federally charged with making false statements to investigators. Kennedy extracted a single typed sheet from the folder. "Senator, this is your Intelligence Committee's Democratic memo dated the 24th of February 2018. You served as the senior Democrat. I will read this slowly, so every viewing American comprehends it. Quote, FBI and DOJ officials did not abuse the FISA process, did not omit material information, and did not subvert this vital tool to spy on the Trump campaign." Kennedy lowered the paper. 3 definitive negatives, Senator. You authored that document. You signed it, You released it to the national press. 22 months later, the Inspector General issued his report detailing 17 significant errors, material omissions, and procedural failures. The FBI had absolutely subverted the process. Senator, the Inspector General documented this reality in writing within a 600-page report, heavily supported by footnotes. A calculated pause filled the room. Senator, 22 months. Did you ever, during those 22 months, or the 4 years that followed, issue a formal correction, an amended memo, a retraction, or a simple sentence acknowledging that the Inspector General's findings completely contradicted yours? Schiff deflected. Senator Kennedy, the issues raised by Mr. Horowitz were addressed in subsequent. That translates to a no. Senator Kennedy finalized. The typed sheet was set down on the bench. The black folder was closed. Within Schiff's mind, a third calculation crystallized. His initial concerns regarding Nebraska statutes of limitations and political exposure vanished, replaced by a cold, undeniable reality: the proceeding was over. This realization manifested not as panic or anger, but as a heavy, objective fact, settling in his skull like a verdict, waiting behind a courtroom door. He had arrived 53 minutes into a public hearing at the exact juncture every veteran prosecutor eventually faces. It is the moment when the procedural math ceases to matter, and mere survival becomes the only remaining objective. He knew his required actions. He needed to hold his ground, deliver a defiant closing soundbite, and exit with his dignity intact. As a Harvard-trained attorney, he knew how to absorb a loss. What he did not know, what nobody in the room except Kennedy knew, was that the destruction was not yet complete. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy addressed the dais. With the chair's permission, I would like to invite 3 specific observers to address this committee briefly. The Republican chairman from Iowa, who had visibly relished the entire morning since the 6th minute, granted the request. The chair recognizes the witnesses in the 3rd row from the back, on the far left side. 3 men stood up simultaneously. Every broadcast camera, including 11 different feeds, 3 cable trucks, 2 C-SPAN robotic units, 1 fixed MSNBC lens, and approximately 470 smartphones pivoted instantly toward the back of the room. The first individual, a man in his early 50s wearing a dark gray suit with neatly combed hair, approached the microphone. He moved with the steady composure of someone heavily accustomed to hostile legal environments. He walked exactly as he had years prior, when his career was systematically dismantled in front of cameras in this very chamber. When he reached the stand, the press section immediately recognized him. A reporter in the 3rd row let out an audible gasp of sheer disbelief. "My name is Carter Page," the man stated. His voice was perfectly calm. It was the same calm tone he utilized in 2017 during the FISA renewals and throughout the evaporation of his career. "I am an American citizen. I served honorably in the United States Navy. I hold a doctorate from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. In 2016, I became the primary target of a FISA warrant constructed upon a document Senator Schiff knew was fundamentally unverified. That warrant was renewed 3 separate times. The Department of Justice Inspector General concluded those applications contained 17 significant errors and material omissions. I endured a federal investigation for nearly 2 years. I was never charged. I was never indicted. I was never arrested. Senator Schiff read the contents of that dossier, largely focusing on me, directly into the Congressional record. Tens of millions of Americans listened to him do it. A brief pause. Page stared directly at Schiff, who refused to look up from the table. "I simply want the Senate and the American public to remember that I am still here." He returned to his seat in the front row. An MSNBC reporter quietly wept. She was not crying out of sympathy for Carter Page. She was crying because she had spent 4 consecutive years broadcasting the narrative that Carter Page was a foreign asset. She was crying because her meticulous notes from those specific broadcasts were sitting in her bag at her feet. The second man, older and heavily built, approached the microphone with the determined strides of a farmer walking toward a broken fence he intended to fix. "My name is Devin Nunes," he announced. "I am a former member of the United States House of Representatives. I served as both ranking member and chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the Progressive Press Gallery, which had been enthusiastically standing just minutes earlier, sat in absolute silence. In February 2018, I released a memorandum. The memo stated the FISA process had been severely abused. It stated exculpatory evidence had been hidden. It stated the dossier remained entirely unverified. Senator Schiff publicly declared my memo was, quote, unsupported by the facts and the investigative record. Exactly 22 months later, the Department of Justice Inspector General verified every single material claim I made. A pause. Nunes did not bother looking at Schiff. He glared directly at the press section. To this day, Senator Schiff has never apologized. He sat down. The third man stepped forward. He was older now, having been in his mid-30s during the events in question, but the intervening years had clearly taken a toll. He carried a small, leather-bound notebook, placing it gently on the witness table without opening it. "My name is George Papadopoulos." In the C-SPAN broadcast truck, a producer uttered an exclamation of pure shock into his headset. "I served as a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign in 2016. I pleaded guilty in 2017 to one count of making a false statement to FBI agents regarding the dates of a meeting. I served 12 days in a federal facility." The Inspector General later determined that the predicate for the FBI's investigation into my life was the exact same dossier Senator Schiff promoted on national television for 2.5 years. A heavy silence filled the room. Senator Schiff has repeatedly claimed on national television that he could not have known individuals were lying to Christopher Steele. I respectfully remind this senator that he held top-secret clearance. He possessed access to intelligence completely unavailable to most members of Congress. He deliberately chose what to do with that access. A second, more profound pause. I served 12 days in federal custody. I served 12 days in federal custody. Senator Schiff has never served a single day. Papadopoulos sat down. The hearing chamber was paralyzed. Adam Schiff remained fixated on the wooden table. His right hand remained glued to his lapel. In the wings, Sarah Lynn, the communications director who had ceased scrolling on her phone, stood perfectly still. She stared at the back of her boss' head with the terrifying realization that the meticulously crafted public image she was hired to protect no longer belonged to the senator. Senator Kennedy resumed. The Southern charm was entirely gone. It was not his Oxford legal voice, nor his Madisonville persona. It was the stark, unyielding tone of a 73-year-old man who knew exactly what gravity the moment demanded. You occupied the chairman's seat of the Intelligence Committee for 4 years. You utilized your top-secret clearance and access to sensitive intelligence to read a fabricated presidential transcript into the official record. You utilized that access to promote a dossier sourced from a man the FBI had already terminated for lying? You hired the whistleblower's roommate one day after the phone call in question. You lied to the American public regarding your staff's contact with that whistleblower, and you filed fraudulent primary residence certifications in 2 separate states during the exact same month for 10 consecutive years. A pause. You executed all of this, Senator, while sitting on a committee designed to be the most trustworthy entity in the United States Congress. Kennedy took a measured breath. But that is not what I want the American public to remember about you. Financial discrepancies can be repaid. Tax exemptions can be refunded. Censure resolutions simply gather dust in archives that nobody bothers to read. Those technicalities wash off. Kennedy locked eyes with Schiff. What does not wash off, Senator, is the permanent damage you inflicted upon the three men who just addressed this room. Mr. Page lost his livelihood. Mr. Nunes was branded a foreign asset on the front pages of major newspapers for 2 years. Mr. Papadopoulos went to federal custody for 12 days, forcing his wife to drive home alone. They lost their life savings paying legal fees. Mr. Page never recovered his security clearance. Mr. Nunes ultimately left Congress. Mr. Papadopoulos still cannot secure a Standard Bank loan due to his federal record. These are real men, Senator. Real lives, real destruction that you actively caused, utilizing intelligence you knew was fundamentally flawed. Kennedy's voice dropped to a low, punishing register. That is not a simple process violation, Senator. That is not a clever literary device. That is the destruction of 3 families, and you owe them substantially more than a drafted press release. The eyes found Schiff one final time. Do you finally understand why a country lawyer traveled up here today, Senator? A silent beat. Do you understand why those 3 men just stood up? Schiff's right hand finally released his lapel. The golden United States Senate pin, freshly polished that very morning by a hotel valet, detached and fell forward. It hung helplessly from its small safety chain. It caught the harsh C-SPAN camera light once, but Schiff made absolutely no attempt to retrieve it. The entire room understood the symbolism. Kennedy required no further folders. There were no more documents. He stared at Schiff with the cold, measured pacing of a judge reading a final verdict. Senator, I have 3 final questions. I expect a simple yes or no answer to each. The room braced itself. Question 1. Did you, on the 19th of April 2011, sign a Fannie Mae affidavit certifying a Potomac, Maryland property as your primary residence while simultaneously claiming a California homeowner's tax exemption for a Burbank property you also certified as primary? Yes or no? 1 second passed. Schiff opened his mouth, then immediately closed it. Question 2. Did you, on the 26th of September 2019, read a fabricated version of the Trump-Zelensky phone call containing sentences that did not appear in the actual declassified transcript into the Congressional record? Yes or no? 2 seconds. 3, 4. Question 3. Did you utilize your constitutional position of extreme trust, and I am directly quoting the United States House of Representatives censure resolution, to intentionally mislead the American public regarding a presidential phone call, a federal investigation, a political dossier, and a whistleblower whose roommate you recently hired? Kennedy folded his hands firmly on the desk. Yes or no, Senator? 3 specific questions. Third, take your time. The 5th second ticked by. The 6th. Schiff glanced toward his communications director. She was actively on her phone, avoiding his gaze. The 7th second. The 8th. He looked at the witness chairs. Carter Page stared back without blinking. The 9th second. The 10th. Schiff's right hand drifted instinctively toward the fallen Senate pin, stopped midway, and retreated to the table. The 11th. The 12th. Schiff looked toward the press gallery. The MSNBC reporter, who had previously mouthed, "That's the soundbite," was now furiously writing in her notebook without looking up. He looked at the Democratic senators on the dais. One studied the ceiling architecture, another checked a phone, and 2 stared blankly at their desks. None of them offered eye contact. He looked back at his communications director. She was no longer on her phone, simply watching him with the grim expression of a professional, realizing her drafted statement would not survive the impending news cycle. The framing of these questions requires a fundamental yes or no, Senator, Kennedy reminded him. The 13th second passed. Schiff remained entirely mute. The 14th second elapsed. Kennedy nodded exactly once. He meticulously closed the manila, red, navy, and black folders, stacking them evenly in the center of his desk. He pushed the neat stack 2 inches forward. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Page, Mr. Nunes, and Mr. Papadopoulos. They have been waiting significantly longer than 5 minutes. He sat back in his chair. The chairman from Iowa, visibly satisfied with the proceedings, slammed his gavel and declared a 30-minute recess. Schiff stood up. He gathered his documents clumsily, stacking them, setting them down, and restacking them. The Senate pin remained dangling, unfastened from his pocket. He bypassed the public exit and walked toward the private staff doors. His communications director was actively typing a statement. The press section could clearly read the first 3 words on her screen. This right wing. As Schiff reached the heavy oak door, he turned back. The broadcast cameras turned with him. Kennedy was quietly latching his briefcase, not bothering to look up. However, his microphone was still perfectly live. Senator Schiff, Kennedy stated to the retreating figure. Madisonville was listening too. Schiff offered no response. He exited, the heavy door closing behind him with the distinct thud of an exit that nobody wished to slam. Yet nobody cared to soften. The fallout was instantaneous and devastating, arriving in 3 distinct waves. By 1,142 inches the morning Eastern Time, 3 specific hashtags dominated every major social media platform. Number 1 was Possum Bit Back. Number 2 was 5 Loans, 5 Lies. Number 3 was Madisonville was listening. The video clip of Carter Page declaring, "I am still here," surpassed 38 million views before sunset. Adam Schiff's office released a weak 12-sentence statement at 114 inches the afternoon. The press release utilized the word right wing 4 times, the word distraction 3 times, and the word manufactured twice. It conveniently ignored the Maryland mortgage affidavit. It ignored the fabricated September transcript. It ignored the hiring of Sean Misko. It completely failed to mention Carter Page, Devin Nunes, or George Papadopoulos by name. When contacted by the Washington Post, the Federal Housing Finance Agency issued a singular, ominous statement from its director. The formal legal referral speaks for itself. Within 48 hours, the Senate Ethics Committee launched a formal, unanimous bipartisan review into Senator Schiff's residency certifications. 3 Democratic senators previously considered staunch allies issued carefully worded statements that noticeably lacked any defense of his actions. A retired federal prosecutor appearing on CNN stated the definitive reality that would loop on television for 2 days. In any other context, the Maryland and California discrepancy would already result in severe legal action. The only entity protecting Senator Schiff right now is the United States Senate. Senator John Kennedy declined over 800 interview requests. He quietly departed the Hart Building through a side exit just after noon. He drove himself to the airport, boarded a commercial Delta flight, and landed in New Orleans by nightfall. Renting a vehicle, he drove north along Highway 22, eventually pulling into the gravel parking lot of a small wooden structure in Zachary, Louisiana. The hand-painted sign above the entrance read Beauregard's Bait and Tackle. Beauregard, an 83-year-old man wearing the same denim shirt he had worn since Tuesday, was sitting on the front porch with a glass of sweet tea resting on the railing. "Long flight, Johnny. Long flight," he noted. "Uncle Beau," Kennedy replied. Beauregard handed him a fresh glass of tea. He did not ask about the Congressional hearing, as the small television inside the bait shop had been broadcasting it all day. "That fellow from California?" Beauregard mentioned. Did he ever say a single word about the second house? No, sir, Kennedy confirmed. That tells you something, doesn't it? Yes, sir. Beauregard rocked his chair slowly. Your father used to say something specific about possums. Yes, sir, he did. He said, a possum will let a man underestimate him for exactly as long as it takes the man to underestimate himself. Yes, sir, Kennedy agreed. Well, you certainly let him underestimate himself, Johnny. Kennedy sipped his tea in comfortable silence. The Tchefuncte River flowed steadily in the darkness a half-mile away, running exactly as it had long before the existence of Congress, intelligence committees, political dossiers, or a politician from Burbank named Adam Schiff. The country lawyer from Madisonville had effectively reminded the political establishment of a truth they had long forgotten. An elite academic pedigree is absolutely no substitute for a documented paper trail. The Constitution is not a theatrical costume, and down in Louisiana, inside a bait shop by the river, they have been keeping receipts since long before the Senate ever formed its committees. Beauregard finished his drink and set the glass down. Are you staying for breakfast, Johnny? Yes, sir. Good. Your aunt is making biscuits. When a seasoned litigator uses a politician's own paper trail to completely deconstruct an established narrative on live television, it leaves us with one crucial, undeniable question. If the highest intelligence committees in the nation can operate under these conditions for years without accountability, what other deeply guarded secrets are currently waiting in a manila folder, ready to be exposed to the world?